in restaurants, it's very important. And I think that the activity of describing what you like in a wine, I think is very key. And so not going into a restaurant and saying, I like Cabernet, but saying, I like dry reds. I like medium to full bodied reds. I like red wines that have tannin. I don't want them to be mouth drying, but I want to feel the tannin and the structure in my mouth. This all describes a typical Cabernet. And then trust the sommelier or the wine staff person to give you something. And I will buy something that I never had before in a restaurant on the slightest excuse. I mean, all I need is an excuse to try it, and I will try it.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 33. In today's episode, we're chatting with the ultra-smart and witty Mary Ewing-Mulligan, Master of Wine and President of the International Wine Center in New York City. She's also just published the 7th edition of the book, Wine for Dummies. Now, quick note, Mary shares with us her favorite wine gadget near the end of the episode. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/33 so that you know where you can buy it. It's just so useful. And yes, I'm teasing you with this because I'm not going to tell you what it is. You're going to have to stick around to the end of the episode to find out exactly what it is. But I know you're going to love it. Tease, tease, tease. All right. Now, before we dive into our chat, I wanted to thank Cynthia Coutu, who hosts champagne tasting classes and networking events for women in Paris, France. I just love the niche she's created with her business. And you can find out more about her events at delectables.com. I'll also include a link to her website in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/33. Cynthia wrote this on Facebook, quote, I'm a proud Canadian living in France and working in the wine industry. I get a lot of questions about Canadian wines from the French. I just discovered this fantastic podcast episode that does a deep dive into Canada's wine history, economy, regulatory framework, etc. Listen to the podcast from Natalie McLean and you'll get all the answers to your questions. End quote. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. You made my week. Now, she's referring to episode 30, which is all about Canadian wines. In other episodes, we cover other regions and topics, but this was a special one to celebrate Canada Day. It means so much to me when you post a review on social media or on Apple Podcasts, which is formerly iTunes. And if you do that, let me know, and I'll give you a shout out on this podcast. Plus, I have a brand new bonus for those of you who do post a review starting today. I've just developed my ultimate food and wine pairing guide. Now, it's a quick template covering the major food matches for red, white, rosé, and dessert wines. It's visually very appealing, and I know you're going to get tons of use from it. If you want me to send you a free copy of this food and wine pairing guide, just email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and tell me where you posted your review. Now, on to our fantastic chat with Mary Ewing-Mulligan. Enjoy. Have you ever wondered what it takes to become a master of wine, especially with a 10% pass rate? It's a grueling designation, one of the most coveted in the world. And on the flip side, the book, Wine for Dummies, it's one of the fastest selling wine books in the world. more than 2 million copies, 38 languages. Well, one woman brings all of that together. She's the first woman in America to achieve the coveted Master of Wine designation. The title represents the highest level of knowledge and proficiency in the wine trade. Currently, there are only 380 people worldwide who are masters of wine, including 51 who are in the United States. She's also the co author with her husband, Ed McCarthy, of Wine for Dummies and 7 other books, with about 2 million copies sold. She is also the wine columnist for the Daily News in New York City for more than 10 years and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Food and Wine Magazine, the New York Times, the Wine Spectator, Newsday, and Gourmet Magazine. She's the head of the International Wine Center, a New York-based school for wine professionals and anyone aspiring to learn about wine. And she joins me from her home in New York City. Welcome, Mary Ewing-Mulligan. Hello, Mary.
Hi, Natalie. It's so great to be with you. You know, I've wanted to do this for at least 6 months now.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I'm glad it finally has worked out.
Yes, we have tried this before. And Mary, there have been so many people asking, when are you going to try having her back? I said, yes, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. So, Mary, there's so many things I want to ask you. But before we dive into the world of wine, I always love to get to know our guests as people first. You have a passion for both yoga and cats. Let's talk cats. I wish I could have a cat, but I'm allergic. So, what's the deal with you and cats, Mary?
I'm very preoccupied with my 2 cats right now because one of them we've had for only a month. My husband was, I almost said collecting cats. My husband was a cat lover when I first met him, and through him, I came to love cats. And over the years, we've had, I don't know, 15 cats, something like that, but we named them all for types of wine.
Love it. So, what were some of their names, or are some of their
Well,
names?
well, right now we have Julianas, which when we take her to the vet, that can be shortened to Julie, so everybody gets it. And we have Cristal, who is all white, and so she's named for the champagne Cristal. So that's not too much of an ask in terms of a weird wine name. I think it translates pretty well.
I love that.
Over the years, we've had Pansy, my dear, dear beloved Pansy, who
Oh,
passed. He left a vacancy for Cristal. And we've had Brunello and Dolcetto and Leoville and a Max in there somewhere because we adopted him from Ed's son. So he had a name already.
love it. So, no 2 buck Chuck?
No, no, not at all. He had Mouton and Margot when I first met him.
Oh, your
Yeah.
husband, who is the co author of the book Wine for Dummies, and he writes about wine. You were saying you two met because you're wine writers. So, did you meet at a wine tasting event, something like that?
We met at a really ridiculous event. It was a dinner in Chinatown. The concept was pairing Italian white wines with Chinese food. And I think most people, when they're thinking of a wine to have with Chinese food, they're not reaching for a bottle of Italian white wine. But this was a couple of decades ago, and I was actually pushing a Prosecco way ahead of the times. I was pushing a Prosecco, and Prosecco happens to be great with Chinese food. So I decided to come to this dinner and I brought my Prosecco. I heard that there was going to be somebody there who works for a wine retailer on Long Island, and that was Ed. So I got to know him that night in a group of about 12 people. But except for my Prosecco, the wine and food pairing was ridiculous.
Ridiculous in a good way
No.
or not in a good way? No, it didn't work. But
No.
the pairing of you and Ed worked.
Yes, it did
Yes.
work very well.
How long have you been married now?
Oh, more than 30 years.
Congratulations. Wow.
Yeah, thank
Well,
you.
that
Thank you.
marriage has aged better than most wines then.
Well, wines can age pretty well. They really
Yeah,
can. I think we underestimate how well wines can age. Not that any wine can go 30 years. I mean, it takes a special wine to go 30 years, obviously. But
absolutely.
wines are not as fragile as we think.
And I hope marriages. But anyway, that's a different topic. This is a wine show. So tell me, what sparked the idea? What gave you the idea to write this? Because it's the original book, Wine for Dummies. Where were you? What happened?
The Dummy series started as books about computers. Das for Dummies was the first. No one even remembers what Das is, but that was the first book. And then Max for Dummies came out soon after that. And I know Max. I use Max, and I considered myself pretty adept, but there was one thing I didn't know how to do, which had to do with fonts. So I was reading Max for Dummies, and I was just taken with it beyond belief because it told the basics to basic readers without looking down to them. And then it was able to speak in an intelligent voice to people who knew a little something as I did. And I said, oh my God, I was riding the Long Island Railroad into the city to work on a Saturday. I'll never forget the moment. It came into my head like something driven by a muse. And I said, oh, somebody has to write Wine for Dummies. Ed and I will write Wine for Dummies. And then it happened. Yeah.
Fantastic. So it's quite a franchise, quite a brand, as you said. So there's a sensitivity to not dumbing it down. Were you worried at all, though, about the title, Wine for Dummies, that it would be perceived as pejorative or I don't know? How did you negotiate that?
I think to this day that is a little bit true to people who don't know the series. Among other things, I remember in the early days, the publisher said the most important thing about our books is the authors. And I think people who don't appreciate the integrity of the authors, they can think, there was an Idiot's Guide that came out.
Oh, yeah.
But Dummies, I don't know, that's the title, and it's been a very successful franchise. In certain languages, it has inhibited translations, but obviously not that much with 38 languages
Mm.
that we've been translated into. I don't worry about it anymore. I think the book stands on its own. And frankly, I think it did from day one. And the franchise has been a great help in selling the book. The book has legs that it wouldn't if it were a one off title.
That's true. That's true. No pun intended, I'm sure, but it certainly has proved itself with more than 2 million copies. My goodness. So, what's the latest development with the Wine for Dummies book? Are you coming out with a new edition or what's happened with that?
Tuesday.
Oh, Tuesday. Excellent. Good timing. What edition is it? What number?
The seventh edition. And actually, it represents kind of a new look. The publisher has revamped the look of the book. The graphics are different on the cover and on the inside. And frankly, I really like them. We got to see them as we were doing the page proofs and all of that. And I think that they're very attractive. So, this is the seventh edition that we've done. The first edition was in 1995.
And do you update the content in the book for each edition, or what do you do to prepare for a new edition?
Absolutely. It is at least 20% new
Ah,
content. In this edition, we added information on the wines of Hungary, which we felt had gained enough critical mass. Of course, they're not all over the place, but in some major markets, you can find wines from Hungary. So we included them. Rewrote a lot of the Argentina section based on a visit that I made to Argentina earlier this year, and things like that. Updating vintages, updating prices so that you're not looking at a price that was quoted 10 years ago and then you hit hard reality when you look at the shelves.
absolutely. And are you doing anything around the launch? Like, do you have any activities planned or you going to do a tasting with friends or anything like that?
Well, we will certainly open a bottle of champagne.
Yes. Which
And
one? Cristal
well,
with the
well,
cap?
it might have to be. We'll see what we have. But no, thank God we're not doing a book tour, which I mean, honestly, over 7 editions, I've had my fill of book tours. It's actually okay with me that we're not
That's
doing
great.
that.
And you have an audio version of this book as well?
Of the first edition, Ed and I
Okay.
did an audio version, yes.
Okay, cool. That's great. At what point in your career did you decide to test for the master program and how long did it take you to achieve your goal? Because you're the first woman in America to achieve this prestigious designation. There are only 380 people worldwide, 51 in the US. I'm not sure how many women worldwide. Do you know that off by hand, Mary?
No, I don't. I considered going on the website and counting
Hmm.
them, but I said, no, I'm not going to
Okay,
do
all right. But very few. Let's just say it's a small, prestigious group, a 10% pass rate. So how long did it take you to get the Master of Wine? What did you do to prepare and study?
Well, for the first half of my career, it was not even an option for us Americans. You had to be working in the British wine trade in order to take the exam. And then in the late 80s, it was opened up worldwide. This was through a grant, actually. It was a philosophical decision by the Institute of Masters of Wine, but
Mhm.
also I suspect it was also a practical decision because the Madame Bollinger Foundation became a supporter of the Institute such that they could have paid employees. And I think that that made the prospect of increasing the numbers a little more realistic. So in 1988, it was opened up to people outside of the UK. And I just knew all of the great masters of wine who were out there, my heroes, Serena Sutcliffe and Jancis Robinson and Michael Broadbent and Clive Coates, who was coming over to New York at the time to do tastings with us. And I was just filled with the possibility, could it be possible that I could be in their ranks? And so I applied, and the system is very different now than it was then. And I think all for the better because there's much more support along the way. It took me 5 years. I passed the theory part of my exam, my second try, which was terrific.
Yes, it takes multiple tries for all of these parts, and 5 years is, like, condensed, I gotta say, but yes,
Yeah.
continue.
Well, considering no internet, considering no Oxford Companion to
Yes.
Wine and all that kind of thing in those days. And then it took me another 3 years to pass the tasting exam, which I had already failed twice. That was my personal bugaboo. I think for some people are better at the tasting and then they have to work harder at the theory, and other people are better at the theory and then they have to work harder at the tasting. So it's just a question of your personal strengths.
And what do they do for the tasting? Are you tasting wines blind and having to identify them?
We taste 12 wines a day blind for 3 days.
Phew.
And we write the answers. And so it's really much more about your reasoning. There is identification involved, but not really identification of the producer, unless it's like a classified growth Bordeaux or something that you should necessarily know. But identification of the type of wine it is, where it's from, the quality level, in some cases, how it was made, how it might be marketed. In other words, is this a premium wine? Is this a hand sell? Is this a mass market wine? All of this, and you have to write your answers and you have to explain what is in the glass that makes you come up with your answers. So if you're going down the path of it could be an unoaked Chardonnay, could be this, and it turns out to be an unoaked something else from a similar climate, not an aromatic white grape variety, you can gain a lot of points along the way. So it's not exact identification. You have to prove that you can think about what you're tasting and draw conclusions from it.
So what was the toughest part then of the exam? So your tasting component was more challenging for you. So what did you do to improve over the 3 tries? Obviously, you were tasting a lot of wines and practicing that way, but was there something that cinched it for you that really got you through it?
Yeah, there was. I remember once on the 3 tests, my scores, you have to have a B to pass, and my scores on the 3 tests were D, E, and D. And I said, oh my God, that's dead without the A. So, yes, the final time, I think what it was is I found my voice. I think that I was trying to kind of have it both ways. Well, the positive aspects of this wine are this, and the negative aspects are that. And I was not coming down decisively
With an
on the
opinion.
wines.
Okay.
Yes,
So
yes,
your voice was
exactly.
saying, "I think it's this and that's why."
Yes. Well, I had to. I came to understand that the people who were judging my paper, everything is numbered, so you don't know the name of the person. You don't know the nationality, except maybe how we spell color. So the people who were judging my paper, they didn't know me. They never tasted with me. And I had to show them that I could taste wine at the level of master of wine. Damn it.
I like that.
It was a little bit of that damn it that carried me over the line.
That's good. Attitude. You need some attitude and some confidence. It's like, "I'm here and this is what I think."
Yes,
Love
exactly.
it. Love it. That seems to be an attitude you've carried forward in other entrepreneurial activities, not only your book, but you also now run the International Wine Center in New York?
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
So tell us
Yes.
about that.
Oh my goodness. I joined there. I had at one point in my life been working for PepsiCo, which was great to have the experience of being in a top corporation like that. But I was outside New York City. I wanted to be back in New York City and I wanted my own voice again. This is well before the Master of Wine episode, but I didn't want to have any allegiance to any particular brands. And the idea of working in wine education where I could believe what I wanted to believe. I could like what I like. I could have opinions that really appealed to me. So I joined International Wine Center as the director of education and then eventually became the owner of the business. And so I have been there for a very, very long time. And in the past 3 years, we became licensed by the New York State Department of Education as a licensed vocational school, trade school.
Once you became a master of wine, do you ever have to retest like a driver's license? Are you currently working toward a new designation or anything like that?
No, honestly, after Master of Wine, there is nothing else. And no, we do not retest. But I think we are all, I can't speak for 100% of the Masters of Wine, but those that I know, and I know many, many of them, are so dedicated. There's a love of learning, a passion for learning. And obviously, there's a little bit of ego that gets you started in the whole pursuit, but you have to love the learning. So we do things like we go on continuing professional development trips to other countries in the world. I mentioned I had come back from Argentina traveling with 40 masters of wine.
Hmm.
We just completed a wonderful trip to California, 50 of us, most of us not from the US, most of us from Australia, New Zealand, Germany, France, the UK, India, to learn about the wines of California firsthand.
So, what do 40 masters of wine sit down and talk about at dinner? Is it all wine talk
Well,
mostly?
some of us know each other pretty well over the course of the years, and sometimes it's grandchildren. It's often about travels, which are often wine travels, and it's about things that are going on in the world, and we share our knowledge. And a lot of talk about the program because we're all involved in education within the program, mentoring people or being examiners, different capacities, speaking at the study courses, the annual study courses for new students. So we're all very involved in that and have our frustrations and our sincere wishes for the success of the students.
Awesome. So, Mary, you're a groundbreaker, you're a pioneer, especially in the world of wine as a woman. What's your take now on women in the wine industry? That's a big open question. You can take it as you like. What's your opinion right now?
Well, there are obviously more of us than ever,
Mm.
and we are at higher levels than we've ever been. I see a lot more women in the restaurant end of it than I used to. And one of the things that was such a challenge for me in my own MW pursuit was finding the time to study. And I had to give up a lot. I had to give up a lot of entertaining, a lot of couples activity, vacations, things like that. And I could not have done it if I didn't have a spouse who was willing to help me in my pursuit. And then when I think about women who are in the restaurant business, I think, how can they possibly do it if they have children at home, if they along their careers have pregnancies? This is the real challenge. I didn't have children at home. I didn't have pregnancies. This is all the more of a challenge. And I'm sure that they're doing it. I think that the men are stepping in basically, to put it simply, I think the men are stepping in. They have got to be to make it possible for women to do this because we don't have wives. I think that goes back to Gloria Steinem that she needed a wife, you know?
I do. Absolutely. Do you think, though, that there's a long way to go? Like, again, another general question, but have there really been steps ahead? I mean, there's more women in the industry, more senior positions, but really, how much more is there to achieve before, I don't know, parity, if you will?
There is room to grow for sure. And I think that for all of us on this continent, the Me Too movement has
Mm,
opening our eyes, not to something that we didn't know, but realizing how pervasive it is
yeah.
and realizing how much we really knew it and look the other way, thinking, oh, well, guys will be guys or whatever excuse we gave in our own careers. I think when I see, not so much in the wine business, but corporations, I see how the guys are still running the show. And then I translate that to wine. There's a lot of room for us to
Yes.
grow.
There are the Me Too things coming up in the wine industry. I mean, we've had it here in Canada for sure. I think there's a lot more that's to come. I don't think our industry is immune by a long shot. And I'm just talking about the wine biz as opposed to the restaurant industry as well.
Yeah.
We've heard stories there. I guess as veterans in the industry, Mary, a group you and myself together, what can we do for young women other than be role models like yourself? How can we support them? There's young women entering this profession, still dominated by men, and what can we do for them?
I think that there are lots of movements now for women within the wine industry. I'm on the board of directors of an annual event called the Women in Wine Leadership Symposium, which is sponsored by an importer, Winebow, in New York City every year. It's been going on for 5 or 6 years now. And it really is designed to help younger women in the field to get answers or to know where to go to get answers for the sake of the industry, realizing that this industry is only going to grow if we bring them on board.
Well put. As leaders in the wine industry, do you discuss how climate change will affect the wines we love, especially California wines?
Absolutely. It's one of the key issues that we talk about all the time. And we're constantly getting input in Argentina, for example, showing how they're going high up in the hills of the Andes, up to 1,000 meters in some cases, to find the right cool climates to grow the wines that they want to grow. Natalie, you asked me in advance if I could sit down and share a glass of wine with anyone
Mm.
in the world, living or dead, that I wanted to, who would it be and what would I talk about? And I thought that I would like to sit down with the late Professor Emile Peynaud of the University of Bordeaux. He was a professor, he was a consultant to the first growths of Bordeaux. He was a consultant for many properties in Bordeaux. And he was probably the man who was most responsible for the change in style of the vintage. The weather in 1982 was responsible for the change in style of 1982 Bordeaux. But that was the first vintage that they called like the California
Yeah.
vintage, riper, softer, less driven by acidity, more driven by ripe tannins.
It's also the vintage that Robert Parker said allowed him to leave the law.
Yes, exactly. It was right behind that vintage. That's true. And I would like to ask Emile Peynaud if, knowing what we know now about climate change, how might that have affected the decisions that he made about the changing style of Bordeaux, making it softer and riper, less defined by acid and more defined by ripe tannins? I would like to know that because he might have thought differently about it. I don't know. It's an interesting hypothetical.
Absolutely, an interesting guest to have dinner with. I like your choice. That's great. If a wine is a Cabernet, but its characteristics are not that of an outstanding Cabernet, so not typical, but it tastes good, should that get a lower rating? Can you measure wine just on its own as a darn good wine? Do you score wines, Mary, first of all?
I do score wines. I score them 100 points. I used to
Okay.
score them 120, and I had to figure out a translation grid for myself to carry me over into the 100 points. Well, I do it when I write on wine review online. It's necessary, but I do it for myself all the time just to codify my opinion of the quality of the wine. So often we wine professionals taste wine blind. When we taste wine blind, we don't know that it's a Cabernet. We can believe that, oh, it has this tannin level, it has this cassis aroma and flavor. You judge it for what's in the glass. You judge it for its balance, its length, its intensity, its complexity, its concentration of fruit character. I like to judge wines for how they perform kind of across the length of the mouth. I rate lower wines that are all up front and don't carry through. That's very typical of an inexpensive wine. Up front, delicious for people who taste it and put it in their mouth and go, oh, that's good. Because all they get is the upfront. Those wines are good for them. But the rest of us, we think about it. We think about kind of the architecture of the wine, which was a phrase that I learned from reading Emile Peynaud. And what is the architecture of this wine? And I think if the quality parameters are there, and you think it's a Cabernet, and then it turns out it's not a Cabernet, it gives you pause. If it turns out it's a Pinot Noir, then you could say, I think this is a damn good wine, but if you're buying it as a Pinot Noir, then don't. Something like that. But if you're judging it knowing that it's a Cabernet, you can fault it for not being typical. But around the world, there are so many different expressions of Cabernet, for example, just to use one
Yeah.
grape variety. So you can And different expressions include different quality levels. So if I drink a very inexpensive California Cabernet and it's kind of sweet, well, to me, doesn't cut it. But when you think about people who want that flavor profile and what the wine costs, you think, well, yeah, okay, for them.
Well, I liken it to like I want to buy a detective mystery thriller, whatever book, and I got a romance story. It's a great story. It's a romance, though, not a anyway. So it depends on was your mind set on a certain style of wine, and that's what you wanted, i.e., I want a detective mystery thriller, or are you just happy it was a good yarn, like it was a romance, but it was well told.
I think that's where in restaurants it's very important to, and I think that the activity of describing what you like in a wine, I think is very key. And so not going into a restaurant and saying, I like Cabernet, but saying, I like dry reds. I like medium to full bodied reds. I like red wines that have tannin. I don't want them to be mouth drying, but I want to feel the tannin and the structure in my mouth. This all describes a typical Cabernet. And then trust the sommelier or the wine staff person to give you something. And I will buy something that I never had before in a restaurant on the slightest excuse. I mean, all I need is an excuse to try it, and I will try it.
Awesome. All right. So I've lost track of all of my questions because I just got carried away on our conversation here, Mary, which is fantastic. But I know for one of my questions I would love to throw at you, just out of the blue here. If you were to put something on a billboard in downtown Toronto, what would you have that billboard say?
Well, it certainly wouldn't say buy X brand. It would
No.
not say that. I think I would like to put up three words. I would like the words to say peace, community, and wine.
Oh, I love it. That's great. It's like eat, pray, love, but I like your billboard better, much better. Another thing I wanted to ask you is your favorite wine gadget. Tell us, what have you got and why do you love it?
This is something that I've discovered only recently, and it's
Okay.
called Repour. It is a little capsule, and it has a little piece of foil on the end. And when you open a bottle of wine and you're not going to drink it all, which can happen, we understand that it's about quality, not quantity. And we understand that we don't want to get carried away in our alcohol consumption. And you can put this into a bottle and it will preserve the bottle. So we've seen over the years many different ways to do this, but I love this way because when you peel off this foil and you stick it into the bottle, there is a substance inside the capsule that absorbs oxygen. It converts the oxygen. I spoke to the inventor of this, who is a chemist or a physicist, I forget which. And there's something that draws, it's the pressure of the gases that causes the oxygen to go up into the capsule where the oxygen is combined and it cannot re-enter the bottle. So I had a very interesting, I tested it on a bottle that I had samples that I was tasting. And there was a bottle 3 days old, half full in the refrigerator. And I had two wines from the same producer. And so I thought, what the hell, let me try. I stuck the plug in, the Repour plug. And then a couple of days later, I opened up the two bottles. One just had the regular cork in, and it was like a fountain of youth. It was like the wine went backwards and was no longer oxidized. One wine was oxidized and the other one was not. And I just think it's great. Now, unfortunately, it's one of those things that you need to keep buying. This costs about $1, I think,
Okay.
depending on the volume that you buy it in. And it's good for one bottle of wine.
One bottle.
It's
Okay.
good for the amount of oxygen in one bottle. So I take that to mean that if you use it for half a bottle and then you have another half bottle, you could probably use it again.
Hmm.
But it's for the amount of oxygen in one bottle of wine. But I love it because it helps the freshness of the product.
Do you like it more than the preserve spray and other ways of preserving wine?
I also like the spray. I like the spray a lot, but I can't keep it in stock. So it's a spray that displaces the oxygen with a heavier gas.
Yeah.
Honestly, it drives me a little bit crazy that the can always feels empty.
I know. It's just weird. I have to listen for it. Like, is there something really happening?
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. Is there anything that we have not covered, Mary, that we should, that I've forgotten? Because this has just run away with us on the time here, which is fantastic. Great discussion. Have we missed something that you'd like to cover?
I think in terms of wine education, I would like to say don't get scared by the information.
Mhm.
There's so much information out there, and information in and of itself does not mean anything. One of the chapters in our book, we talk about lingo, jargon, what the jargon is supposed to mean, but doesn't necessarily mean it. Like words like old vines, but then it's not regulated. So really, is it? Things like that. Yeast strains. Sometimes people will talk to you about the yeast strains they use. Yeah, if you're an MS or an MW student, go for it. Gobble it up, write it down, turn on your tape recorder. But otherwise, as a consumer, it doesn't mean anything to you unless this person can tell you what those yeast strains do to the taste of the wine. So I would say don't get mired down in the information and
Mhm.
try to understand the significance of it. So that's something that I would say about learning about wine and studying wine.
Great advice. Great advice. So, Mary, where can we find you online and your books?
Well, I write for winereviewonline.com. I
Okay.
have a new column up every 2 weeks, and I'm on Instagram
Excellent.
at mem.mw.
Okay.
Not always about wine, often about cats. And International Wine Center is on Facebook and is on Instagram also, and Twitter too. But I don't know. I'm on Twitter, but I haven't been doing it lately for various reasons.
And I assume
And,
your books are like
and
Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, all the online sellers and physical book retailers?
yes, they're available everywhere easily. That's one of the benefits of the very powerful Dummies franchise.
That's awesome. Mary, it's so exciting. I hope your launch on Tuesday of the new edition goes gangbusters, and I know it will. Like, they have a super successful launch. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I could do a whole other session again in the future with you.
Thank you, Natalie. The time has flown. I
It
can't
has.
believe
I
it.
know.
But it
Whoosh.
was so easy and so much fun. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks again for joining us here. Mary has such terrific wine wisdom, doesn't she? Here are my takeaways from this discussion. Number one, Mary has that rare combination of extreme expertise and practical humility. It shows in how she first thought that the Dummies franchise would be a great fit for wine without having to talk down to people. Two, I admire her tenacity in getting through the grueling Master of Wine program and focusing on her tasting notes to explain her thinking, even when she may not have guessed the exact wine. Number three, she poses some really important questions on how climate change will impact winemaking and the styles of wine that we enjoy. Four, she's doing some important work for women in the wine industry, not just as a role model, which she very much is, but also with her Wine Council initiatives. And five, I'm adopting her motto: peace, community, wine. You'll find links to Mary's books, her website, her social media handles, the wine report gadget that she recommended, as well as Dr. Emile Pinault's book, The Taste of Wine, it's a classic, in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/33. Now, did you know that you can listen to this podcast on your smart speaker? All you have to do is just say, "Hey Google," or for Amazon's Echo, I won't use her name actually, that begins with the letter A, because I'll activate all of my devices here and yours. So I'll just call her Madam A. So you would say something like, "Madam A, play the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast." Same for Hey Google. I'd love to chat with you about wine while you're doing the dishes, the laundry, having breakfast, lunch, dinner. Hey, it's always wine time, isn't it? What was your favorite tip or quote from this episode? Share that with me, please, on Twitter or Facebook and tag me at Natalie MacLean. On Instagram, I'm at Natalie MacLean Wine. If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it. especially one who's interested in the topics that Mary tackled. My podcast is really easy to find, whether you search Google on the name Unreserved Wine Talk or on my name. Finally, if you want to take your ability to pair wine and food to the next level, join me in a free online video class at nataliemclean.com/class. On next week's show, I'll be chatting about the challenge of pairing seafood and wine, the real dangers of flying champagne corks. It stopped the game at Wimbledon, by the way. And the new trend of sober, curious wine drinkers, as recently reported in the New York Times. I can't wait to share more wine stories with you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this one. I hope something great is in your glass this week.
You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.